Good morning, everyone. I'd like to call the Public Works Committee meeting to order. And members of the public are advised that our meetings are webcast live by the City of Hamilton and temporarily archived on the city's website. Other individuals in the meeting may also be audibly or visually recording the meeting. All electronic devices are to be switched to a non-audible function. So, Madam Clerk, excuse me, are there any changes to the agenda?
Yes, Mr. Chair, there are changes to the agenda. We have two added communication items. Item 5.3, which is correspondence from Tom Priestley, the Director of Friends of the Aviary, as well as added item 5.4, which is correspondence from Sam Scarlett, the Manager of Forestry and Horticulture Environmental Services. Please also note that there's an added presentation before you for item 8.3, respecting the location of the aviary.
Okay, and members of the committee received a number of correspondence on the aviary. You've only received those two then?
Sorry?
A number of members of the committee, at least I know I did, received a number of correspondence regarding the aviary, both for and against. These are the only two that the clerk's office has received then that are on the changes to the agenda?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. Can I have a mover and a second to approve the agenda? And this has to be an electronic. Moved by Collins, seconded by J.P. Danko. All in favor? And that's carried. We'll move on now. Is there any declarations of interest? Seeing none, the approval, Councillor Farr.
Mr. Chair, I just heard you say about the correspondence, but our agenda did already have a number of different correspondence from the Friends of the Aviary, just so there's no confusion. We did get two added, but I think Madam Clerk, we had a number already, 5.2 to 5.4, I think, or 5.2, 5.3. Anyway, just want to let you know there's more than just the...
Yeah, that's the point I tried to make at the start, Councillor Farr, that there's a lot more correspondence we've received other than these two, but these are the only two that the clerk has received.
Well, sorry, there's also another two, so there's four in total. There's two that were already previously on the agenda. That's what I have to point out. Okay. Sorry about that.
Through you, Mr. Chair, item 5.2 was originally on the agenda, correspondence from Emily Depp. 5.3 and 5.4 were added.
Okay, thank you. So the approval of the minutes of the previous meeting. Can I have a mover and a second to approve the January 14th? Moved by Farr, seconded by Nan. All in favor? Electronic vote. That's just as well you don't see me. I mean, I can't see you either. Okay, so that's carried. Communications from Martin Skeller, Protection Program Manager, Lake Erie Source Protection Region, respecting a notice of pre-consultation and request for municipal endorsement of proposed changes to the Grand River Source Protection Plan. Motion to receive. Pearson, Van Der Beek. Oh, you want to speak to it? You're on.
The recommendation, Mr. Chairman, is to endorse. So I will move to endorse it.
Okay. This is my guidelines here to receive.
Madam Clerk, then.
Got a change?
Through you, Mr. Chair, we'll receive first, and then we'll have a motion to endorse.
Okay, I'll do that.
Okay, so you're going to, all in favor then of receiving?
Vote.
That's just carried. Yeah,
right.
We don't need an electronic vote on that.
Okay.
Any opposed? That motion carries. Now, Councillor Pearson, you can move. And I think Councillor Van Der Beek wanted a second to endorse the proposed changes. Sam? And Tom here? No. Okay. That's carried 10-0. We have correspondence from Emily Tepe, respecting Friends of the Aviary. Motion to receive and refer this to consolidation or consideration of item 8.3. We don't need an electronic vote on this, so all in favor? Any opposed? Okay, Councillor Pearson moved it, Councillor Van Der Beek seconded it. And that carried. Cora Thomas and Tom Priestley, Director, Friends of the Aviary, respective Friends of the Aviary, May I have a motion to receive and refer this item to the consideration of 8.3? Moved by Councillor Whitehead, seconded by Councillor Partridge. What are you doing here? Councillor Vanderbeek is a seconder. All in favor? That's carried. And a correspondence from Sam Scarlett, Manager, Forestry and Horticultural Environmental Services respecting Friends of the Avery. Moved by Nan, seconded by Pearson. All in favor? That's carried. Delegation respect request. Moved, okay. And seconder? Pearson. All in favor? Electronic vote. And that carries. And now delegation requests. Ken Rader, Infrastructure and Infrastructure Health and Safety Association respecting a certificate of recognition. Please have a mover and a second to approve the delegation request. Moved by Pauls, seconded by Danko. All in favor? Electronic vote. Esther, you need to vote. And that's carried, I think. Yeah, it's carried 10 to nothing. Item 7.1 is a consent item, and this is the Keith Hamilton Clean and Green Committee minutes of November 20th. I just need a motion to receive. Moved by Vanderbeek, seconded by Pearson. All in favor? And that's carried. We go on to public hearings and delegations. So we have first Sonny Ross respecting charging stations for electronic scooters, which was approved by the Public Works Committee on January the 14th. I'd like to call on Sonny Ross to delegate respecting charging stations, and if you come to the podium now, that'd be very much appreciated. Sonny Ross, are you here? It appears not. If she comes in later, I'll bring it back up at that time. Let's move on now to the proposed permanent closure and sale of a portion of the Wentenall Court, Hamilton. And as required in the city bylaw 14204, a public meeting is required. Notice of this public meeting was provided and was posted on the City Hamilton's website. This notice advised that anyone whose lands are prejudicially affected may appear before the committee. The clerk has advised that there are none registered to speak at this matter. So I'd like to call for speakers. Is there any members of the public who wish to come forward to speak in this matter? This is to close a portion of Wentenall Court in Hamilton. And for a second time, are there any members of the public who wish to come forward to speak to this matter? And for a third and final time, is there any members of the public who wish to come forward to speak to this matter? Seeing none, can I have a motion to close the public meeting? Moved by Pearson, seconded by Collins. All in favor? That's carried. Okay, the public meeting is now closed. Are there any questions or discussions from the committee members? And Councillor Pearson, you're first up.
Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to move the recommendation before us. This has to do with the in the vicinity of the airport lands, and it's certainly good news moving this forward to assist them in land massing and development.
Okay, is there a seconder to the motion? Councillor Pauls. Okay, Councillor Whitehead, to the motion.
Just for clarification, it's Councillor Brenda Johnson's ward. Have we received correspondence, or did the chair have an opportunity to talk to her about?
She didn't contact me as chair.
So we're not aware if the ward councillor is supportive of this or not.
I have not heard that she's either supportive or opposed. Okay, so I see no more speakers. So all in favor of the motion, this is an electronic vote. No, it's about. What time to vote in this, Councillor Jackson? Councillor Pauls, you need to vote. I think Councillor Jackson is going to pass because he just arrived. Well, where's everybody Well, it was 10 to nothing. Does that answer your question? Okay. So item 8.3 is Sherry Houston, President of the Board of Directors of Friends of the Avery, respecting the location to the Avery. So I call upon Sherry to come to the front and provide her delegation to the committee at this time. Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning. Is that better?
Just keep it pulled right over to you.
Okay. Good morning. My name is Sherry Houston, and I'm the president of the Board of Directors of Friends of the Aviary. We're here today to give the committee the results of our relocation efforts, an update on our operation of the aviary over the past 15 months, and a proposed course of action for your consideration. So our first order of business was to address the OSPCA orders. And we worked with the City of Hamilton, the OSPCA, and our avian vet, Shannon Lee, and we had the orders resolved by November of 2017. Sorry. During our search, we reached out to city councilors. Oh, sorry. I'm just a little out of order with my slides. Beyond addressing the OSPCA orders, there were a number of different areas that we wanted to address in order to further improve the environment for our birds and to provide some of the exercise and socialization that they need to maintain their health. So some of the things that we did were increasing the humidity through the addition of tropical plants and monitored use of humidifiers. Constantly replacing toys, which is important for their exercise. We increase the volunteer interaction with the birds because they're very social. Working with our avian vet, we prepared a daily health checklist, and we changed diets wherever that was necessary. We believe these things are very important, as our number one priority as a board is the health and welfare of the flock. So during our location search, we reached out to a number of different councillors, including Matthew Green, who is no longer on council, Jason Farr, Councillor Terry Whitehead, John Paul Danko, and Maureen Wilson. So as required, we began our search for a new home. And of the locations that we considered, only two were really under serious consideration, and the first was the printing house. The printing house was offered to the aviary as a free space for the first year, with leasing costs to begin potentially in the second year. Because of the estimated cost of about $20,000 to retrofit the space, and the location in a dense residential area, and the lack of parking for volunteers and visitors, the board determined that the printing house would not be a suitable location for the needs of our flock. Harper's greenhouse, again, offered these space to the aviary at no cost. Unfortunately, the location has no access to running water, no kitchen, no bathroom, no climate control, and again, as with the printing house, would require a large investment in order to retrofit for the needs of an avian organization. We did look at consider multiple commercial and retail properties, and we had a lot of concerns from potential landlords based on our inability to provide information and insight onto our past financial and future financial credibility. This is a previous board governance issue, and so certain records are not available to us. They also expressed concern with the high number of animals on their property and worries about neighboring properties and potential for noise complaints from business and residents. So we thoroughly explored 7 locations. There were more than that we looked into, but 7 of them were given a thorough vetting, and none have proven to be suitable for housing live animals. So we have continued up until the date of this presentation today to our search with the help of a professional real estate agent who has volunteered his time. So we wanted to discuss some of the other activities that we've undertaken in the 15 months since we received our extension. The location search, of course, was top of our list, but above and beyond all of that, and going hand in hand with it, is the health and welfare of the flock, and things like marketing and fundraising in order to increase our profile and bring in the revenues that we would need to move from our current location. So one of the things that we did, we were kindly provided with the services of 2 industry professionals, one in marketing and one in fundraising. They volunteered their time to create a fundraising plan and a new branding and website, among other products, including my T-shirt. So our fundraising campaign included a series of Canada Helps campaigns, mailings, sponsorship requests, and 13 fundraising events in 15 months. So I think that's pretty substantial in terms of our efforts to increase our fundraising. We also had wonderful people step forward from the artisan community who volunteered to provide product donations with product purchase, including this bracelet for the Love of Birds bracelet that I'm wearing today. So, as a direct result of that, we've raised more than 164% more than we have in previous years, and this graph shows our year-over-year revenues beginning from 2015, 2016 to current day. And as you can see, this board has put in a tremendous effort and been incredibly successful in raising our revenues. So along with those efforts, we work to increase our public profile and connect to the community. These efforts are incredibly important because one of the goals of the aviary has been to provide community programs and to have schools and other organizations come for education, not entertainment, but also entertainment. So we participated in 5 off-site festivals and events, and we've hosted private tours for Calvin Christian School, Woodview Mountain, Ontario Early Years, and participated in a variety of outreach activities with Sparks, Beavers, Yes Club, RBG, Yes Club through RBG, Meadowland Adult Day Services, Canadian Council of the Blind, Little Smiles Daycare, Burlington YMCA Camp, Delta High School, and small family groups. So we're also in the process of developing partnerships with other community organizations, including the Hamilton Public Library, who's requested that we become part of their summer program, and Westdale Children's School. So the other issue that we faced was our volunteer we inherited a really depleted volunteer base. And as you can imagine, trying to care for birds 365 days of the year is an incredible investment of time. But we have managed in the short time that we've had to double the number of volunteers to 70. And we've also we also have about approximately 100 more volunteers who are in various stages of training. We have put into place new training guidelines designed to ensure that our volunteers give the birds the best possible care. And in the past year, our volunteers have put in an incredible more than 8,500 hours of time to care for these birds. So our ultimate goal is to break our financial dependence on the City of Hamilton and to build a relationship with the community as a reputable nonprofit corporation. We do understand that we have some work to do in terms of improving our reputation based on some of the past issues that we've had, and I think that this board has proven that we would be able to do that. So it's our proposal that we continue to remain at our current location and develop a 3-year plan to become independent of the city. In order to do so, one of the first things we would like to do is hire a paid manager to oversee our operations. As a volunteer-run organization, one of the issues that we face, obviously, is having individuals available during the day to do presentations and to reach out and outreach programs to the community. So we see this as a vital component of any plan moving forward. Our proposal is that we would be able to cut the contributions from the city by 25% in our first year of the plan. In the second year of the plan, we would allow for a further 35% reduction in city support. And in the third year of the plan, we would be entirely independent of the city. These numbers that we're giving you are based on our best estimate of the city budget. Unfortunately, we have not been supplied with a budget from the city in order to make more accurate assessment of what we're capable of doing in terms of these reductions. So by doing all of this, Friends of the Aviary is no longer going to be using money from the city's operating budget, and we will then be able to apply for city funding through appropriate channels, like every other not-for-profit organization. We can approach the city or submit proposals for grants and funding. What we would ultimately like to see is a new agreement drafted between the city and Friends of the Aviary that would include a very structured timeline for when the aviary will achieve its goals for financial independence. It will include regular reports submitted to the City of Hamilton, and it would also include criteria and timelines for the transferring of ownership of the birds to Friends of the Aviary. So I want to thank everybody for listening today, and we're going to open the floor up for questions, but I would like to invite my colleague and the treasurer of our board of directors to join me to help to assist in answering your questions. This is Kimberly Wickert O'Hare. Sorry, don't mean to get your name wrong.
Thank you, and welcome Kimberly also to the podium. We have a number of councillors who wish to ask questions, and we'll start with Sam Rola.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome. Let me start off by saying that it's very nostalgic, the aviary is for me, being that my grandfather and I used to visit when I was a youngster. And having said that, taking the emotional side, focusing in on the business of the city itself, the history is very rich from 1920 27. And I think in the 90s, there was a decision made for economic purposes that the city staff that was part of the operating agreement would be eliminated, and that the Friends of the Aviary were born. And at that time, the goal was to become self-sustaining. So through you, Mr. Chairman, we're at a point now where it's obviously not sustainable. And I understand what your long-term plan is and the short-term plan. Have you put a dollar value to those plans? And can you just elaborate on that this morning?
Kimberly?
Do you mean a dollar value on what we would need to raise?
You're asked, yes.
How much are you looking for from the city over the next 3
Well, from the city. So right now, I think the biggest support would be staying in our location, because as we showed on the graph, we did raise a lot of money, putting some effort in, and that's without a lot of knowledge on how to fundraise, because a lot of our volunteers are there for the birds and not for the business side of things. And as you were saying about the history, I believe the aviary kind of got a little bit comfortable because we were having a lot of support from the city, and since it's a closed aviary now and we're no longer breeding birds, that used to be part of their income stream. So we did some estimates. Our fundraiser did some estimates that if we were fully independent in a location where we were paying rent and taxes and heat and all the costs, including hiring a part-time programmer, about $100,000 per year. But again, that's an estimate.
Right now, for the next 3 years, I think, Councilman Riley, you're looking for what you're looking
Okay.
for. The city for
So,
the next 3 years.
like, how can we help? What is your ask today with respect to bridge financing you to the point where you want to be 3 years from now, as you mentioned?
Okay, as I said during the presentation, it's hard for us to estimate that cost. To the best of our understanding, the city is currently contributing anywhere between $25,000 and $35,000 a year to support the aviary. Which, you know, is small by any standards, but not insignificant. We do understand that, especially in terms of the historic support that we've received. Our problem is in terms of numbers. So it would be 25% of either 25,000 or 35,000. We haven't been able to receive a budget from the city. We have asked, and we haven't seen any of those materials. We've tried to keep records and haven't been able, or tried to keep receipts to better calculate. Essentially, what we would be asking for in the first year would be 25% of either 25,000 or 35,000.
Okay, so just for clarity purposes, last term, I know that Councillor Jackson and I and Council provided a reprieve, and there was going to be a period of time for the aviary to come forward with a plan of action, and in order to become sustainable. So let's start off, let me just rewind a little bit. What happened with that original plan when that reprieve was granted?
Well, in the slideshow that Sherry said, we did spend a lot of effort looking at new locations, but also in that time, we wanted to start fundraising. We built up our volunteer base. We started to pay, well, saving some money because the city did step in to offer to pay for some bills. So we realized in that time that at this point, even though we've made a lot of progress raising money, like tripled from the last 3 fiscal years, that our ability to do that, considering we were building on everything else that we started, like the SPCA orders, that we believe that having a secure location, if we were to stay where we are right now, it wouldn't, and all the fundraising ability that we've already done, we could continue that fix up the building, stay where we are, and all we would really want from the city is to be able to stay at the location, and then hopefully within a year take over the costs of the building maintenance. But right now, we do get supplies from the city, like garbage bags and paper towel, and they are paying for some pellets for the birds and vet bills, but we can take that over for now. And it would be, I think the main thing is to stay there in order to build up our ability to fundraise.
And what we're being told is that that cost will be 25% of the existing allocation.
Yes.
Effective
A reduction, yeah.
Yes.
Effective when? Through you, Mr. Chairman.
Well, our fiscal year end is March. So if we were to start then in our next fiscal, that would be appropriate.
Okay. Now, through you, Mr. Chairman, with respect to the capital obligations on the building itself, do you have an assessment of what needs to occur or needs to be spent in order to address those issues?
We've heard, we've had various numbers presented to us by the city. One of the numbers that I heard was $1.5 million, which we, exactly. That would be to which we, that would, I mean, to us, that would, you could rebuild an entire building for that amount of money. We haven't seen any engineering reports to support those numbers that were given to us by the city, but we do believe, because of the way the aviary is set up, the way the building is set up, that we would be able to accomplish it in a phased plan by moving birds from one section to another section. So I would estimate that we might need in the range of an additional $100,000 to $200,000 to do that. But the question of money is an issue of fundraising. And the situation that we're in right now with regard to large funders and grant applications is that we cannot say to a funder or a funder who, where we're going to put the money. Are we putting the money in a new purpose-built aviary? Are we putting it in a leased location, or are we putting it in the renovation of an existing location?
And I think that's my concern, Mr. Chairman. I'm not quite sure what we're being asked to do right now, and we really need to use a rifle on this, like to really be focused. And so, do you mind, Mr. Chairman, if I ask staff questions while?
If I do for you, I have to do it for the next 7 people, so it's better if
I can wait till after.
It'd be better if we come back to staff afterwards.
Okay, so I think what I'm hearing is that they know that they need help, but they're not quite sure exactly what that help is. And through you, Mr. Chairman, there's a maximum that you've now mentioned, which is 1.5 million, which seems quite significant. My question at this point would be, what would be the minimum amount required to make the capital aspect dealt with, and can be dealt with incrementally towards that 1.5 million. So what the minimum amount required is what I'm looking for.
Okay. So to answer that, and in our report, we talked about barriers to be charging admission for people to come to the aviary, and one of those is the state of the building. It does look very neglected, and we looked into just the initial small cost of new windows, paint, and fixing like holes in the ceiling and those repairs, and in the kitchen. And we didn't get anybody in. We could only estimate, because when we did meet with the RBG and we discussed putting money into the building, they couldn't really answer if we were even allowed to do that, because they needed to speak to the city and there was some communication. So we were going to get our own person to come in to give us an estimate on that initial cost to remove that barrier, to have people come and make it look a little bit nicer initially. And so we can only guess how much, like just the windows and making it look a little bit nicer. And we talked about making the entrance to the aviary at the front, because we're building a path right now So
Right, so I want to just emphasize on something. So what I'm looking at is finding out what needs to be done rather than what you want to be done. So the aesthetics is one thing.
aesthetics, yeah.
But I would say that's secondary to some of the issues related to the, I guess, the environment being conducive to safety for the birds themselves, or.
I honestly, I don't feel like we've had our vet actually comes to the aviary, and we have Nicole Foster from the OSPCA who does her inspections, and they've commented that the aviary looks a lot cleaner now and it's brighter, but I don't think there's any safety issues.
Okay, so there's nothing related to any capital upgrade related to providing a safe environment.
It's, yeah.
I would say that in terms of improving the environment, we certainly do need to do additional work on the greenhouse.
You, Mr. Chairman, I'm just trying to keep you alive right now, so.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay,
I
so
appreciate
baby
it.
steps.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if the safety issue is not a concern, then
Councillor,
let's look at how
may
do we
be a-
get to that point?
That may be a question I'll ask for you, because it's a very good question which could help the rest of the
Yeah.
I'll just also through to staff then. Is it Sam? How much investment is needed right now to keep it going at the present location, and will RBG agree to fixing it up?
Through the chair, as of today, we don't have a facilities report to give a dollar value for the exact amount to keep it running, but as of today, the facility is operating with no outstanding OSPCA orders against it.
Okay.
And the second part of the question, sorry.
The other question was the RBG. They own the building, as I understand it.
Correct.
What's their views on it?
I would have to defer that question to Raymond Kessler from Real Estate, but currently there is no lease on the building. The lease has expired, so we haven't officially approached RBG about agreeing to a new lease.
So you haven't communicated with RBG yet and what their plans are, if any?
RBG have indicated what their medium to longer term thoughts are about the property as a whole, but they haven't given us a specific date about when the party needs to vacate the building.
What I need to know, though, Mr. Chairman, is is the RBG willing to keep them there?
That's the question I was trying to get to, and it sounds like you don't know. Dan?
Through you, Mr. Chair. So the city leases the facility from the RBG. So I don't think the RBG sees themselves as having a relationship with the aviary.
Okay, so they're not a challenge then. They're not an obstacle to us.
They're not looking to do something different with that building or that land, in your mind?
Through you, Mr. Chair, over the longer term they are. I don't think they have any immediate plans for it. So, I mean, if we were given instructions to go.
How do you define immediate?
I was going to say, okay, what we need, through you, Mr. Chairman, I think what we need to do is we need to find out all the stakeholders' position on this. I think we have a general consensus that we want it to survive, but we're not willing to spend millions on it, but we're definitely incrementally willing to work towards a plan or a solution. We don't have the information before us to make an informed decision. So what we need is we need the RBG to sit down and give us something in writing. We need our facility staff to sit down and report on that. And we need an update from the aviary people as well. But all three parties should be sitting down together and putting together an initiative.
I totally agree with you, although I see Ray come up to the front. Why don't we just see what he knows?
Yes, please.
Ray, do you have a comment on this?
So we've been in dialogue with the RBG, not just on this, but on the park as a whole for some time through the chair. The RBG has intentions of returning that facility back to the original, I think it was a children's garden or some kind of a garden. At this point in time, they don't have defined time frame for that. And they certainly haven't indicated to us when that would happen. I know they're going through a bit of a planning process right now, which I suspect some of the delays in terms of them wanting to move forward with that are probably funding related delays. But the RBG certainly would have to be engaged in more direct dialogue with them. At this point, it's fairly ambiguous.
Thank you. So
I think
maybe we need a
Nicole has
referral motion
something.
back.
So exactly. So at the appropriate time, Mr. Chairman, I think we're way ahead of ourselves here. We need to have the fundamental understanding of where everyone stands on the issue. But more importantly, we need to know exactly what those dollar values are, because at this point, we just can't make a decision based on assumptions. We actually have to have actuals. So at the appropriate time, Mr. Chairman, I'm going to refer this to staff to ensure that dialogue is established between the aviary, the RBG, and our staff in order to come to some sort of understanding of where everyone stands and what the actual costs are rather than the assumptions of those costs. And I appreciate your time.
Hey, Councilor Whitehead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'll stick with the questions of the delegation. So I appreciate the conversation. I'm a big supporter of the history and trying to facilitate locations. I'm not clear in your presentation how you ruled out the other potential location, and it's not trying to move it. I just want to make sure that you have a strong and viable plan, because I'm certainly aware of availability of an old building right on the Mount Brow inside of Woodloch that is very accessible, and one of the issues here is accessibility. The other issue is what I've been reading is about the size of the cages and those kinds of things. So help me understand how you ruled out the other locations.
Is the printing house, how we ruled out?
Well, you looked at other locations. What were they, and how did you come to ruling? So you talked about printing house, for example.
Yeah. Right. So that one was ruled out. Well, initially the zoning was wrong, but they changed that. And the initial cost to make it retrofit it would be $20,000. There was no parking. It wasn't wheelchair accessible. It wasn't easily accessible on a bus route. I think there's a little bit of walking required. So because of that initial cost and not being, and it was in a neighborhood as well. We were worried about noise of the birds because they can be pretty loud. And this was just to fix up the main floor, but I believe it wasn't wheelchair accessible as well.
And I think to your question with regard to how we ruled out other properties, that was your question, correct? Yes. Again, we would be looking at taking on leasing costs as well as doing substantial upgrades to any of the properties that we leased. Not all at the same cost. Some of them would have kitchens and bathrooms available. Some did not. Some would have direct sunlight. Some would not. Some would be in residential areas. Some would not. Some would be inaccessible or not on bus routes. So every one of them came with a significant price tag. We concede that we are not at the point where we can prove our financial viability in order to prove to a landlord that we would be able to manage a long-term lease.
So I appreciate that. To the chair, it's my understanding that if it, on balance, is true that the liability and risk on capital for the building is $1.5 million, and I think I heard from you that you can build a new building. I agree. The reality is that you need a purpose-built building for the purposes of what you're doing, and this building wasn't designed to do that. So when you take the assessment of the $1.5 million liability and risk versus building a new building for 1.5 that's more purposely built for the purpose of Avery, wouldn't that be more of a prudent approach?
That would certainly be our preference, to have a purpose-built aviary. The situation that we're in right now, well, it was not our belief that the city was willing to support us in that, and I think like with the funding. I know that the city supports the idea of the aviary, but we would like to build a purpose-built aviary, but we think that in order to raise the capital to do that, we need a period of time to raise that significant amount of capital. And in order to do that, the best course of action for us would be to be in a space where we're not expending large amounts of capital. We would, I do agree that it seems a little not necessarily logical to put money into a building that we're going to leave in 3 years. But at the same time, I think there are opportunities to discuss those issues with Royal Botanical Gardens if we were to sit down and have a discussion about that.
Add something. And the 1.5 million, just that we don't know where that number came from. I know Leanne Seeley reported it last November 2017, but we don't really know what that consisted of. And in the Churchill Park Master Plan, when it said the future use of this building, it says once the aviary moves to Gage Park, they were going to ask the community what they would like to do with that building. But then there was an alternate plan that if the aviary did stay there, the building would need upgrades, but that number was like 300,000, but that also was in 2010. And so they, I guess, were looking at the plan back in the Churchill Park Master Plan.
And I think it would also be our position that to repair the building to stay on a temporary basis would not cost a significant amount of money.
I appreciate that, and I certainly support the former, the councillor that spoke earlier regarding, we want to help, so we just need to know what the tools are. We want to make sure you have the capacity, and the safety of the birds is ultimate, and the health of the birds. So I would like to see the independent bodies providing letters of support in regards to current operation, 1. 2, I wanted to see, I would like to see your capability, understanding that you raise those dollars. I'm trying to understand if you had set money aside for capital, you had to set money aside for veterinarians, you had to set money aside for administration, you had to set money aside for food. And then you show me you raised 16,000. I'm just trying to understand how you have the capacity to operate this thing in the balance of a year.
Well, as I mentioned, we do have a professional fundraiser who has prepared a fundraising plan for us. We have a number of issues with regard to approaching applying for larger funding grants. One of the issues was in terms of timing. In our extensions, there wasn't really a great deal of time for us to put grant proposals together, especially in light of some governance issues from previous boards and the efforts we needed to make in order to prove some level of financial viability. So there is that issue. We would certainly be going after that type of grant. We know there are a number of different organizations. Some of them are very much in line with what we do, so animal-related organizations, but there are also, as you know, many opportunities for granting, and we believe that our aviary would be successful in at least getting some of those grants, some of that grant money.
Mr. Chair, I look forward to Councillor Merla's motion. I think we all want to help, and I know that my colleagues have been very helpful on Aqua and other things. So in different areas, and you look at the history and the legacy of the aviary in the community, we just want to, again, like I said, those principles, safe, accessible, sustainable a plan, and I think we need to see what that motion is. Thank you.
Councillor Jackson.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Sherry, good to see you again. And if I recall, when you were first here, was it with Caitlin Smith, if I recall? Is Caitlin here? There she is. Wonderful. Both of you presented really well. And other than a couple of more questions for clarity, I just want to congratulate you. I mean, a lot of organizations, agencies in town, they're on a mission. Council tries to bide them some time, and quite frankly, efforts end up being either futile or not pursued vigorously to the best degree to get good outcomes before they report back to council. And I mean, I'm reading through the report you sent us dated January 21st over the weekend. You did do your best to look, searching for a new home. Sounds like you consolidated the two factions, I'll call it, on the previous boards, and at least brought a new board together to the best of my ability, what I'm reading. Fundraising, It looks like you've got pledges and fundraising up to $16,000. Is that annually? That would be maintained annually, hopefully?
Yeah, that was just from March 1st until December.
Wonderful. So you've done that. The OSPCA, I think, Mr. Chairman, if memory serves me right, staff can explain later, but if memory serves me right, it was the orders from the OSPCA that kind of triggered. Everybody got in somewhat of a panic, concern mode from the corporate standpoint that, you know, maybe it's just, and again, this is my editorializing, Mr. Chairman, that maybe it's best for the city to just get out of this business and let's rehome the birds instead of maintaining the sensitivity of the flock. And that's what you folks have wanted to do, to keep the flock together and maintain the 90-year tradition, Sherry and Kimberly, of this great cultural site. So, Mr. Chairman, thanks for allowing me that quick preamble. I just have a couple of questions for clarification. When you say about the current agreement constrains the FOA from achieving some goals. Mr. Chairman, through you to Sherry, could you further elaborate on that, please, Sherry, what you meant by agreements? Is that city agreements with the FOA that are constraining you, or,
yes.
Or is that more internal? Could you explain?
There are both. There are city constraints with the city. We are constrained by our agreements, which doesn't allow us to pursue certain revenue-generating activities. This is not to say that we would definitely pursue these activities, but they are potential revenue streams for us, and some of those would be for training, the idea of training birds, rehoming birds for which you would receive a rehoming fee. Because we are a closed aviary, we currently can't do that. Also, because of the shape of the building, we're not able to charge admission. It's very difficult for us to ask people to come into a building that looks the way it does and ask them to pay $5 or $10. Currently, people attend by donation. And the other issue, of course, is that we are only open one day a week. Yeah, and the other issue is that we cannot hire, under our agreement, we're not able to hire a staff member. So that is something that we would like to see change.
So Sherry, between the internal matters and the relationship currently with the city, I'm sure Councillor Marula's motion will address all that comprehensively. That will somewhat, Mr. Chairman, unleash you to be more productive. Is that what I'm hearing, Sherry and Kimberly?
That is our hope. Okay.
In my hearing today, overall, you've done phenomenal. I just want to say that sincerely. Your passion's amazing. In my hearing today, you need to buy some more time further, Mr. Chairman, through you to Sherry?
Yes.
Okay. And as well, I just have one or two more questions. You want this to be like a destination place, as a tourist destination place. Have you had discussions with our tourism department, Mr. Chairman, through you?
No, we have not yet had discussions with your tourism department. I don't think any of us felt that we were at that stage at this moment in time.
Okay. So, Sherry, just to summarize then, you need some more time. We need to clarify, the OSPCA all resolved? Wonderful, that's been removed. I think, again, that was, if memory serves me right, that was the trigger that caused a sudden, panic that we had to do something about the situation there. And we need to clarify both the operational side, how much money is needed just to maintain the aviary before we decide with your serious fundraising goals, hopefully, from a capital standpoint and maybe city contribution. And I would keep an open mind myself down the road in terms of helping you that way. But I think from a bare minimum, we need to understand what it is you need from the city with the $16,000 you've raised. And as you said, over 3 years, try to reduce or mitigate and eliminate that amount. Is that an accurate summary, Mr. Chairman, through to Sherry and Kimberly, what I'm hearing?
Yes, that is an accurate summary.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Chairman, appreciate it.
Sure, it'd be helpful if we knew if it was 35 or 25, and it's
Well,
25% reduction.
My understanding of the issue, when last we spoke with the city, my understanding, what they quoted to us was $35,000. We're not, where the uncertainty comes in is whether or not that amount includes maintenance on the grounds around the aviary. And we understand that there are community gardens there, there's Churchill Park there, and those areas are already being maintained. I think the only additional cost for the grounds, the maintenance of the grounds, should be garbage pickup, essentially.
Okay, we'll ask those questions to start
Right.
when you're finished. Councillor Van Der Beek.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So through you, thank you for coming in today. And I want to say that I think it's a wonderful thing that you're doing, and I sincerely hope that there is some way that the aviary can continue and that you can be sustainable. Most of my questions have been answered by the previous speakers, but I would like to say that I would feel better about even the consideration of your request if there were some solid facts. You have budgetary issues, you have governance issues, you have financial history issues. I mean, you know all your issues. You need a budget of $100,000, you think. If you could say to me, we need 95,000 or we need 100,000, here's what it's going to be for, here's where we think we can be sustainable, and here's how. So, I mean, so in 9 months you raised $10,500 over and above what you raised in the previous year, which is great. It's great. But you need 9 times that in order to run. And that doesn't mean you need to go out and sell, you know, cookies and candies and fudge to get the other 9 times the fundraising. Absolutely, there are avenues out there that you need to pursue, but we need to know what they are. Like, what are those avenues? Is there a real plan of action that we can see, that we can contribute to in a way that will make you sustainable? Because, you know, I've been involved in small business virtually from the moment I was born. And you can't run a business hoping. You have to run a business with some facts. And in your presentation, nice presentation, great presentation. I appreciated all of the emails that we received. Some felt that we should be pulling the plug, and some felt that we should be moving on to give you a hand. And I think that everyone around the table is game to help however we can, but we need some facts and figures. So I am going to be supporting Councillor Marula's motion that you get together with the stakeholders, the other stakeholders, and hope that you come back with some solid evidence of what it is that you're going to do and how you think that you can manage to employ someone, pay rent, feed the birds, look after the vet bills, and even if that continues to have some contribution from the city, show us how that's going to be, how you think you can be sustainable. So I didn't have any questions by the time they got to me, but for me, that's something that I need to see in order to be able to understand how we can help you properly. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor.
Councillor Wilson.
Thank you very much. Just so folks understand, I don't sit on the Public Works Committee, so I'm not afforded an opportunity to vote, but I do appreciate the opportunity to speak, and thank you very much for that. It's hard. I still haven't managed the, I've had numerous conversations at great length with Sherry, less so with Kimberly, but nonetheless we have chatted. And I actually don't have a great number of questions for you because we have had an opportunity to drill down into all of these opportunities. So in terms of choreographing politically, I'm not that good at that because I already know the answers. My questions will be that of staff. And I think Councillor Marula has highlighted some of the gaps that we need to fill in for our purpose, but also for your purpose to go forward. And I just want to say, without a shadow of doubt in my mind, having spoken to you and observed you in the aviary, that I do believe in my heart, and along with the Friends of the Aviary, that your number one priority is the health and well-being of those birds. Otherwise, you wouldn't have been doing what you've been doing with your son, who prompted you to begin this love affair, and Kimberly to take on the responsibility just because you live in proximity, but now owning those birds in terms of care and love, and everyone else who sits and volunteers on the board. And if that is your number one priority, that is mine, because we are owners of those birds. And now is not the time for a philosophical debate on whether that was a rightful role for a municipality to take. It is our role now, and it is our responsibility now. So moving forward, and throughout this, that is the lens that I have tried to bring to this file. I have watched all the previous Public Works Committee meetings. I have transcribed them. I have them in note. I have read all the reports. I have had the conversation. I was going to ask a single question, and Councillor Jackson has already asked us, because if you're hoping to generate further revenue, you have hinted in your, or said in your correspondence, that there are encumbrance to you in doing so. And as part of the move forward, and you've described a little bit of those encumbrances, I would like that to be part of the discussion. What is the responsibility of the city in trying to remove any of those encumbrances for you if we're asking you to generate revenue, but we're not doing what we can do within reason to assist you in that. So I would like that to be part of that consideration moving forward. And I would like to thank you both very much, and everyone who's been working, taking care on our behalf. You are doing our work, taking care of our birds. Thank you.
Okay, I have no more speakers, so a motion to receive the delegation. Moved by Councillor Nance, seconded by Councillor Pauls. All in favor? Carried. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I did indicate to some members of council I would give you the opportunity to ask staff any questions, and then after that I will go back to Councillor Marula for his motion. So do you have any questions of staff?
Members of council?
Okay, no questions of staff now? Okay, so Councillor Marula, your motion.
I thought I was chairing. I was up there too long last month. Okay. Anyway, all right. So the staff be directed to formally meet with the Friends of the Aviary, RBG, and formally outline options to review to establish sustainability. B, the staff assess the Friends of the Aviary's proposal to determine feasibility. C, that the Friends of the Aviary be allowed to function on a month-to-month basis until a long-term solution can be established.
Okay. The recommendation I had ready for me from the staff was that a motion to refer the business case and the presentation to staff to report back to Public Works. So you'd rather go with your motion rather than the drafted motion the staff have prepared? So the intent here is to keep the Aviary then, is what I'm picking up from your motion. Now it's different from this one? Okay, is there a seconder to that motion? Councillor Jackson, is there any discussions on the motion? Councillor Jackson.
So, Mr. Chairman, yes, I'm strongly supportive of that. I just need to know for the FOA, city staff, I believe the 15-month window, if I recall, the agreement that we had previously given to us by the City of Hamilton with the Friends of the Aviary, I need to know that we're not going to be tripped up on a technicality legally. So what they've heard today, whoever wants to answer this, the city solicitor, the new manager of forestry, the general manager of public works, I want to make sure we're not going to be tripped up technically, that after this motion's approved, hopefully, that city staff go, well, you know, sorry though, the 15-month window has closed. In spite of you want us to get together, we'll chat, but there's really nothing more now because the agreement is null and void. So
Your concern is whether this doesn't matter because the 15 months have expired.
Mr. Chairman, whoever wants to answer that, please.
Do you want us to take that? Oh, Nicole, okay.
Through you, Mr. Chair, to the mover, if I may, Councillor Marula, the second, I believe, clause in your motion speaks to going, allowing the Friends of the Aviary to go month to month. That's the third clause, I apologize. So what I would suggest perhaps is expanding on that section of the motion to say, because what I understood that the councillor was getting at was exactly that, was to expand or to allow for an extension of the agreement until such time
on a month-to-month basis.
So if we could be maybe
until staff reports back
explicit on that point, then that would ensure that the agreement, because you're right, the deadline for the aviary to find a new location, as for council's previous direction, was today, and we don't have a new location. So if council is looking to do something different, then yes, we do need to be explicit about amending.
Does that motion now, as cleared up by the mover, okay with you now? That it be extended on a month-to-month basis?
I would expand it to say that that specifically that the agreement be extended on a month-to-month basis to allow.
Agreeing that, Madam Clerk, did you get that? Are you clear with that? To know how to put the motion together for council? Okay.
And it has no deadline. So the way that the motion is drafted at the moment, that will continue indefinitely to allow just the council's clear on that.
It's on a month-to-month basis now. The movers agreed to amend that, and the clerk has it. Councillor Jackson, you still have the floor.
I'm city solicitor, thank you, and I'm just glad that I asked the question so we wouldn't be tripped up on a technicality. Thanks, Mr. Chairman, I'm supportive. Thank you.
Thank you. And so I didn't hear you, Councillor Mula, mention that the RBG also give us their position in writing. Is that because I didn't hear that read out? Can you just read that part back to us?
So the A component is the staff be directed to formally meet with the Friends of the Aviary, RBG, and formally outline options to review to establish.
That would include a letter from RBGA with
meeting with them to formally meet with them and report back formally. Yep.
Okay. So Councillor Vanderbeek.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So thank you, Councillor Jackson, because I was going to ask about the extension of the date. But I would also like to mention that the Aviary, I think we all know that there are many benefits to the city from having the Aviary, and from things like just a tourist attraction to the fact that it's a place where our birds have been housed and looked after for a number of years. And so as staff and the stakeholders are meeting, I'm wondering whether part of that could be, and it may not need to be in the motion, but to also look at what the benefits are to the city of continuing to have some part in.
For example, how many visitors a year attend?
Yeah, some of the data that talks about, you know, what that Aviary brings to the good of the city, and so not just about how are they going to sustain it, but what part might we have on a continuing basis or not.
Dan?
You, Mr. Chair, yeah, we're happy to include that information in the report. It would be helpful for us. Our interpretation is that the council's made the decision that we're getting out of the aviary business. It's just a matter of how. So I just want to make sure from a clarity perspective, when I heard the word sustainability, this is still in the context of it remaining a closed aviary. So that would be helpful just to clarify that.
Okay, so what would you like to hear the motion say? That they also include the reporting back, as Councillor Vanderbeek says, on the benefits to the city? And what else would you like, General Manager?
Maybe just some clarity around the word sustainability. Our assumption is that we're continuing down the path of this being a closed aviary. So as long as that hasn't changed, that's
You don't know that until you report back. Yeah, we need you to come back and tell us.
Could I clarify my version of what I said about sustainability? I'm talking about the Friends of the Aviary being able to sustain the aviary, and whether we have a part in that may have something to do with our decision about how that comes back and whether there's some benefits to the city. Am I muddying this motion? I see Councillor Jackson is furrowing his brow.
Are you posing a question to someone?
Yeah, I'm posing that question to whoever can answer that.
Well, it'll be Councillor Marula. He's the mover of the motion.
Then it's to him.
Okay, so let me just try to explain this again. I'm going to read it again because it's pretty self-explanatory. The staff be directed to formally meet with the Friends of the Aviary, the RBG, and formally outline options to review and to establish sustainability. B, the staff assess the FOA's proposal to determine the feasibility, and that the FOA be allowed to function on a month-to-month basis until a long-term solution can be established. And to elaborate on that, what Nicole added as well, which I believe the clerk will be elaborating on the final motion. And clearly, sustainability means that they still exist. So this is a whole plan, short-term and long-term plan, to put together a plan to allow them to move forward, bridge everything for them to the point of sustainability. So although ultimately that may mean that we're out of the aviary business, it doesn't necessarily mean that. And that's what we're asking for, all the options to be brought back to us. And if one of those options, and it should be, that perhaps we want to have a partnership of some kind, that be established as well.
And could you include that, and Councillor Vanderbeek, if I'm trying to interpret what you're saying, to include another line that the staff also include the benefits to the city of being in the business?
I took that as a friendly. Yeah, I took that as a friendly emotion.
Just write it down there so it's part of the motion.
Yeah, I think the clerk has
that. I would suggest you just write it down on the written copy.
I'm relying on the clerk to do that. I think she'll be fine with that, right? Are you okay, Madam Clerk?
Through the chair, yes, I've got it.
Okay.
Thank you. That is exactly what I was looking for.
Okay, excellent.
Thank you.
Okay, so Councillor Danko.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, further question I have that I don't think is addressed in the motion is an assessment of the current state of the building and the capital costs that might be involved. Would you consider? Okay, so just for my own clarity, make sure that we're not just talking about bridge financing, we're also talking about the total building. Yeah. Okay.
Do you want clarity from the general manager on that?
No, I'm good with that. Thank you.
Okay, I see no more speakers in, so I'll call for the vote. It's an electronic vote. All in favor? Okay. That carries 10-0. 10 in favor of the motion, none opposed. Okay, let's move on then. And there are no staff presentations. And there is a discussion item. 10.1 is the ArcelorMittal Dofasco GP Transportation Agreement. Any discussion? Councillor Marula.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And just quickly, both Councillor Nan and I are in discussions with Environment Hamilton as well as the Crown Point group. And there's an issue, and an issue that's really important to the East End. In this discussion or agreement with Dofasco, it's important that we incorporate anything related to air emissions. So years ago, I brought forward a motion that asked for all industrial lands to be paved in order to mitigate any dust issues. In this particular agreement that they're seeking for their permit through the MTO, it doesn't in any way take into account the drag-out issue. I've spoken to Edward, and he agrees that he's willing to go back to incorporate that in the actual negotiations, which I will formally move accordingly today, seconded by Councillor Nan, and also go to Edward because he needs to expand upon another issue related to this report that needs to be amended as well. So through you, Mr. Chairman, to Edward, could you just elaborate on the other amendment necessary?
Understand the question, Edward?
Yes, thank you through the chair. I just wanted to point out this agreement and the recommendations before you really are giving us authorization to negotiate. So the issue that's been identified by the councillor can be incorporated as a direction to the staff in terms of dealing with that agreement. I also want to point out on page 4 of 5 of the report, our most recent discussions with the FOSCO have identified a need for a longer stretch of the route being added into the agreement. Right now on page 4, it talks about a 400-meter route. We're actually talking more about a 700-meter long route that's primarily consists of 300 meters north of Burlington Street. So that's just a point of clarification for the committee here, and we'll look to any direction we may be given by the committee in terms of the negotiation points.
Councilor Rula?
Okay, so I'll move that accordingly at this time to amend the report.
Okay, there are no speakers, so you're moved by yourself, seconded by?
Councillor Nan, that the staff be directed to negotiate dust issues and mitigating efforts of the FOSCO in order to meet our objectives of mitigating dust complaints.
Okay. Is that written out for the clerk so they have that?
You okay? I can write it out, sure. But did you understand that? I'll write it out.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I understand.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Okay, so it's been duly moved. This is to deal with dust suppression on those heavy vehicles coming out of the FOSCO on our streets.
Right.
I see no request for speak, so all in favor would be an electronic vote. That carries. Okay, now back to the main motion then, which is the recommendation of city staff. Any other discussion on the main motion? Seeing none, all in favor of the main motion?
As amended, yeah.
As amended, yeah, as amended, sorry.
You're going to hold it down. It's static.
Carries 10-0. Okay, let's move on now to 10.2, which is the procurement of consulting services for detail design of the east-west road corridor in Waterdown. Is there any discussion? Councillor Partridge.
Yes, thank you, Chair, and I appreciate the opportunity to be here. I think folks are well aware of the many discussions we've had on the east-west corridor for the Waterdown bypass. And I do have a couple of questions, if you'll allow me, sir, to ask staff.
Okay.
Yeah, is that okay? Yeah, good. Very generous of you. I have spoken to the chair, to yourself, about this particular file, and also to Councillor Pearson and Councillor Vanderbeek, who have agreed to move it and second it on my behalf because I'm not on the committee. So this particular staff recommendation, if I may, the recommendation is that the single source procurement pursuant to Procurement Policy 11, non-competitive procurement be approved, and that the General Manager of Public Works be authorized to A, negotiate with Dillon Consulting Limited a price to carry out the detailed design for the new east-west corridor from Centre Road to Avonside. B, negotiate for the consulting work should an acceptable engineering fee be agreed upon, and enter into and execute any required contract and ancillary documents. And C, that the funding for the proposed work is available in the approved budget ID for the east-west corridor Waterdown bypass. And so if I may, through you, Chair, to staff, what is the most compelling reason, in your estimation or in your opinion, to make these recommendations?
Who's going to take it? Okay, great. Go ahead.
Through the chair, Councillor, this is a significant project. It's, pardon me, its overall budget exceeds $40 million. Public Works will be delivering about $15 million of that directly through construction. By retaining Dillon, who already have most of the background on the environmental assessment, they've been dealing with the species as risk as well as the sensitive wetlands. They're in the best position right now for us to be able to accelerate the detailed design. That will allow us to get a design for a bridge, 2 roundabouts, 7 culverts, the street lighting, electrical, together with the landscaping and the hydraulics. They're already well informed on all of that, and they've done all of the background work. So we would recommend that we retain Dylan directly rather than putting an RFP together.
And Gord, I appreciate that very much. It is quite a significant project, as you have said, and they have been involved with this for a few years now. There's complex partnerships they've been negotiating with the agencies, the Hydro, particularly Conservation Authority, as is all contained in the report. But it's part of a broader project as well, which is in partnership with the City of Hamilton, the City of Burlington, and Halton Region. And of course, Halton Region does have jurisdiction, and Halton Conservation, over portions of Waterdown and this project. More importantly, can you just talk about the bridge replacement that needs to be done, because that is quite significant, and that bridge replacement can't happen until this east-west corridor is built.
Through the chair, you're referring to the Grindstone Creek replacement in downtown Waterdown. And you are correct. We can't remove that key link until such time as we're able to transfer that traffic volume onto a different facility.
Yes, thank you. And that particular bridge, folks, just so you can get it in your mind's eye, is located on Dundas Street, and it is just east of Mill Street. So it's literally in the downtown part of Waterdown. And when that bridge is replaced, and it needs to be replaced within the next 5 to 8 years, it will literally shut Dundas Street down for 6 to 8 months. And it is the only corridor in Waterdown other than Parkside Drive. So this east-west bypass cannot be put any further behind. It's already 5 years behind schedule for reasons we won't go into, but they were mostly to do with the province, the previous government, not the current government. So the timeline on this is quite significant. We cannot have any further delays. That my community has been suffering badly, particularly over the last 5 years. The traffic congestion, I invite every single one of you, if you have not been up to Waterdown, you go any time of the day, and you will sit in traffic, and it is horrific what it is doing to the neighboring communities, to the side streets, and to the folks that live there. So I'm asking you to please approve this and support it, and we can get on with it. And I appreciate any questions you need to ask. Thank you, Chair.
Zerdenko.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I have a few questions for staff here. So I guess initially I'm confused of why we would recommend sole sourcing a $600,000 design project. And I appreciate Councillor Partridge's comments there on the schedule. So maybe if I could just summarize the reasons in the report so I understand them. So Dylan did the EA preliminary design. They're familiar with the job. They have contacts with the utilities, CP, which is important. And from the report there, I believe it says that a competitive bid process would delay the completion of the job by 4 to 6 months. Is that correct?
Gord?
Through the chair, that's correct.
So just on the schedule, so to make sure I'm clear, the bridge that we're talking about, Grindstone Creek, the scheduled replacement recommendation for that is 5 to 8 years, correct?
That's correct.
So when I'm looking at the schedule, if we're only talking about a competitive bid process and lengthening the schedule out by 4 to 6 months, in the report, the scheduled completion date is the spring of 2022. So if it were to go to a competitive bid process, we'd be talking about the fall of 2022, correct? So it'd be the same construction season.
Correct.
Under the relevant consultations section, where there's discussion with consultation with purchasing, can you tell me what the current purchasing policy would be for a project of this nature?
Dan, are you going to take that? Gord?
Through the chair, we would tender it.
So it would be a competitive process. Is that the recommendation of purchasing? I think that's what I read here, that that they support the issuance of an open and competitive process. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay, so I'm going to move a motion that A and B be replaced with simply a competitive bid process, because on the timelines, I really don't see an advantage to that. So should I speak to that motion now, or?
I'd like to hear the other two speakers first, and I'll come back to you.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, so we have Councillor Pearson.
No, Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to be on the record to move the recommendation that's on the report.
Okay, so after Jay.
Come back off and come back on.
Up
Thank
his
you.
amending motion then.
Thank you.
Councillor Vanderbeek.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to say that as long as I can remember my adult life, this bypass has been coming. It's coming, it's coming, it's coming. And there are thousands of people who are waiting for this bypass to be built. And so for me, this motion is assigned to so many people in, not only in Waterdown, but in all of Flamborough and many beyond, that there will be relief from the congestion that takes place all day, every day, on Dundas Street in downtown Waterdown.
Okay, it may be appropriate then to wait till Councillor Danko puts his motion and debate it at that time, because
so I was speaking to this.
The motion will be to approve it, and if Councillor Danko's.
Okay, so just give me one more sentence.
Okay.
And so, my seconding of the motion is for this motion in the recommendations in this report. Thank you.
Thank you. So I think I'll go to Councillor Danko now. I think you'll be speaking in relationship to the amendment, will you not? No? Okay, go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Chair. And I think if you'll allow me, I'll just give you a broader picture. The whole reason for the traffic issues happening in Waterdown go back to 2002, when the province mandated that Waterdown would be one of the significant growth areas in the city of Hamilton, which had just been amalgamated at that time. And what that meant is that 7,800 new homes would be built in this tiny little village of Waterdown, which is no longer that. Two east-west road corridors, small corridors, that was it. One of them being Dundas, the other being Parkside. And the reason, and then it went to the OMB, and the OMB said, oh, traffic won't be an issue because you'll have your bypass built. So here we are, the approval given by the OMB for all the developers to do full build-out of all of their housing, and that was in 2005. Well, guess what? That build-out has taken place. There's significant building going on up there, and we still don't have our bypass, which, by the way, has been in discussion for 35 years. 35 years. So now the community was promised that the bypass would be built, that it would be in conjunction with the houses being built, and there'd be no issue. The OMB ruled against the city in trying to phase in the development of the houses with the infrastructure for the roads and the bypass, and ruled that the developers could build full out. So folks, that's what's happened. That traffic isn't just people cutting through, it's people who live there. And it is significantly unjust to me as the councillor that this community has had to deal with this and not have that bypass built as planned. So I hope that just provides a bit more context, that the reason the bypass has not been built is because it was held up at the provincial level. The city just got approval for it in 2014. The original submission was made to the province in 2004 and 2005, and they sat on it. And we had it contested, we had bump-up requests made. Like, this community and this particular file have been literally through the ringer. And if ever there was an example of how a project and a community has been mistreated through the OMB process, this is the poster child in Waterdown and the bypass. And so, you know, it's not just going to be 4 to 6 months, folks. I can tell you that. Because when the submission was made to the province, they said, oh, it's only going to be 2 to 3 years at the most. 10 years later, we got approval. And now the city has been scrambling for the last 4 years to get it done. It's not going to be 4 to 6 months. I can guarantee you it will end up being a year to 2 years. And this community, of all the communities around, deserves to have the relief. And I'm just asking you to support that, because I cannot support the amendment that's coming forward. Thank you.
Mr. Danko, do you want to place your amendment?
The amendment that would be on the table then would be to replace items A and B of the recommendation with the alternative for consideration, which is that the city can prepare a request for proposal and invite several consultants to submit detailed proposals.
So it's amendment number 1, is it? Let me just...
There's just one amendment. Alternatives for consideration.
Okay, so is everybody understand? Oh, is there a seconder to that motion? Seconded by Councillor Nan. So does everybody understand the motion is to go from negotiating a contract with Dillon to a publicly procured contract for the engineering services, correct? Correct. Okay. I see no, do you want to speak to it?
Yeah, I'll speak to that. Just, I'll try to be brief. So I appreciate the history of the project. I really do. I, have driven through there often, and I can appreciate the amount of traffic and the growth that's gone on there. But in the context of this motion and the staff report there, we're just talking about the tendering of the project. So I'm going to speak to the difference between a sole source and an RFP and why I believe we should go towards an RFP. So talking on the timelines there, maybe a clarification from staff. The 4 to 6 months would be for staff to prepare and tender the RFP. Is that correct?
Word.
Correct. It'd be the preparation, the tendering, the evaluation, and the award, and then, pardon me, like a pre-construction or...
So I'm still confident in our staff that this project will be tendered and that the 2022 construction season date, there's no reason to think that that will slide past that. In terms of the $600,000, I mean, we're talking, I think, the $40 million construction project. The capital costs there are huge, but in terms of consulting work, $600,000 in consulting, engineering, design work, that's a really big job. Thinking back on some of the jobs that we have been involved with, like sole source, I think the biggest job that we ever were sole source was around $75,000. For the same reasons where we did all the initial design, the EA and everything. So just talking about the tender there, Dillon, having done all the preliminary work, will have a competitive advantage going into the bid. So I understand, and I have a bit of a, I don't know, not conflict's not the right word, but I agree with the intention to sole source to somebody that's familiar with the job. I think that's maybe more appropriate to smaller jobs. In this case, the bidder, if Dillon would bid on this, which of course they would, they have a competitive advantage having done all of that initial work. From my own experience, when I'm putting together prices for sole source jobs, I basically would include everything. So you're gonna get a higher cost, whether it's negotiated or not. I'm sure Councillor Ferguson would agree with me on that. There's also an issue if the consultant is too close to the jobs. There is an advantage to putting it out to tender and inviting everybody to bid on the job. Number one, it's fair to the other consultants that aren't cut out of the bidding process, but there's also a danger when you're too close to a job, you might not look at everything broadly, and that can end up costing significant money downstream in the capital phase. I could go into some examples on that, but I won't bother. So I think that's all I have on that motion, and I think that there would be a savings to the city overall if it was to go RFP, and that's the recommendation from our procurement. So I think that's what we should stick with.
Okay, thank you. So I have no other speakers, so we'll go to electronic vote. If you vote yes, you're supporting putting it out for a public bid. motion carries on a 9-2 vote. So, Councillor Pearson, I'll go back to you for the other motion. Or do you want to move it, Councillor Van Rijk? Okay, Councillor Pearson, do you want to place your motion?
That's before us.
I think a second by Councillor Van der Beek. Is there any discussion on it?
Commend Councillor Partridge for her patience, if I can just add, for her patience in moving this along, and I can certainly understand. No. And I just want to be sure that this doesn't become a project like the Red Hill. We've hit 35 years, and hopefully it doesn't hit 50 plus. Thank you.
Our road has taken 16. Or, you know, it's just, we seem to get bogged down on these projects. So I see no more speakers. All in favor of the motion? As amended. No, it wasn't amended. Just in favor of the motion. The amendment failed. Can you just prompt us and I'll put you on.
To clarify, Chair, when you, before the vote, you stated that voting in favor would take this to a public bid.
Correct.
RFP.
You're correct.
Correct.
This is what's before you now is the sole source of the bid.
But wouldn't that impact the current vote that we just had,
No,
which
the
was to
amendment was to go
RFP?
to alternative A, or 1, which would have put the project for engineering services out for public tender. That failed. So we're back to the main motion now, which has been duly moved and second, and let me finish, and recommended by staff that we negotiate it with Dylan, who did the preliminary work. So that's what's before you now.
The vote was 9-2 in favor. It was carried. As amended would be the appropriate.
Through you, Mr. Chair, that's correct.
Okay, I can't see the vote up there, but the motion, if you voted yes, you supported a sole source, okay. Oh, you supported putting it out for public tender. I agree. I apologize for that misunderstanding. Okay, so that motion carried then, Madam Clerk?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Okay. So so we're back to the main motion as amended then. Thank you. It's like that last drive in the last 2 minutes, right? Okay. So you want to, the motion then is to support the staff recommendation as amended. As amended, which was to sole source the engineering procurement. Have I got that right? Okay. So the motion then is to move the staff recommendation as amended, which is to publicly tender the engineering services. Have I got it right? I apologize. This is complicated. This is confusing, I guess is a better word. So I have no requests for speakers. I don't know. That carries. Okay, let's move on now to 10.3, which is the Hamilton Strategic Road Safety Program. And Vision Zero. So is there any discussion on this? Councillor Farr.
Mr. Chair, through you, Martin White, David Ferguson prepared this. Edward is also here, Soldo. I'm wondering if I may ask for you for a very brief summary of what is before us from one of the three staffers.
Are you going to take that, Edward? Okay.
Thank you, through the chair. I'll start, and then I'm going to turn it over to Superintendent Ferguson, as he's been working diligently on this for the last number of months. What you have before you is a follow-up report to a motion that Council directed staff in January 2016, which was to develop a very comprehensive plan to improve road safety within the city itself. So after looking at doing a best practices review from other municipalities that have included Vision Zero in their approach, We've developed here before you an action plan, one that really does highlight the implementation of Vision Zero and Vision Zero principles. It does include as well a capital budget request as part of that. The program itself is focused on evaluation priorities, engineering priorities, engagement priorities, and education priorities. Through the capital budget that was approved a number of weeks ago, there was a number of projects that were approved, and what we put before you here today is a number of initiatives that would be funded from the Red Light Camera Reserve and would be dealt with through the operating budget. If you have any other further questions, I can have Superintendent Ferguson provide some greater detail as well.
Anything further, Councillor Farr? Councillor Pearson. Or sorry, Councillor Jackson. Would you re-hit your cue again, Councillor Pearson?
Councillor Pearson ahead of me, I'm fine if she was ahead of me.
Can you just re-cue it then?
Okay.
Okay, go ahead, Councillor.
Yeah. Okay, thanks, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate the report from Manager White and Superintendent Ferguson from our Director Soldo. So first of all, I just want to, for especially the new members of committee and council, you see where the funding is coming out of the red light camera program. If any of your constituents in the future were to mention how this is a horrible program because it's just another opportunity by the corporation to grab some money. This program, which has had millions of dollars because of people who have run red light cameras, this program has saved the general levy, the everyday taxpayer who has been law-abiding, has not run red lights, has not gotten the $325 fine when the picture has captured them going through a red light. This is a self-sustained program. It has revenues, no impact to the levy. And I just keep saying that, Mr. Chairman, because as you know, back about 15, 16 years ago, Hamilton was one of the first cities to implement the red light camera program. And this was one of the reasons for it, all for public safety. First and foremost for public safety, and secondly, that it wouldn't increase or impact negatively the general levy. It was for those who, unfortunately, don't get the message and run red lights. Mr. Chairman, on page 5 of 9, can I just add, for the record, under Roman numeral 7, Councillor Nan and I serve on Seniors Advisory Committee. I noticed the Advisory Committee for Persons with Disabilities are going to be consulted, but there's no mention of Seniors Advisory. Could I add that as an amendment at the appropriate time?
You can do whatever you want to do.
Oh.
As an amendment.
Oh.
It doesn't mean the committee will support it.
Okay, thanks. Okay. I know you put a comma in that sentence. Darn, I wish you had said you could do whatever you want, Councillor. Okay, so Seniors Advisory, at the appropriate time, I'd like to move that amendment. A couple of questions. Superintendent Ferguson, page 3, if you don't mind, Edward, only because of the past engagements I've had with the superintendent. Under engagement priorities, you've got Environment Hamilton for neighborhood engagement, a great organization in town. But David, if I have some, which I do, if I have some active neighborhood associations that have been working with me for many years, can they be engaged instead, if you will, and Environment Hamilton would be on standby? Or if I support this here today, does this disqualify or exclude my very active neighborhood associations? Mr. Chairman, through you.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Yes, so we've done work in the past with various community groups, especially in the downtown area. So yeah, if they have an organization established, a neighborhood community group, we will work with them rather than through Environment Hamilton.
Okay, that's terrific. And again, if a particular neighborhood wants some traffic calming measures, speed bumps, a holistic approach, Mr. Chairman, to looking at neighborhood plans to make pedestrian cycling safer, and Environment Hamilton is the only one, then absolutely, I'd love to work with Linda Lukasik and Environment Hamilton. On page 4, Edward or David, so I see the capital descriptions there, pedestrian crossovers, traffic calming, speed limit reductions. I don't see anything for IPSs, intersection pedestrian signals. Mr. Chairman, through you to either Edward or David, is this not included in that? Is that a separate line budget item? Is that a different path that a member of council has to take to get an IPS installed? Mr. Chairman, through you.
The IPS is the signals that do the countdown for
No, they're the ones where they're not the full signalization at the intersection where
flashing
pedestrians
wigwams.
cross,
Okay.
that they press the button.
Okay, David?
Thank you through the chair to Councillor. The IPSs themselves are included through our normal program, so it hasn't been identified here, but there is funding available through a different source there.
Oh, that's good to know. Okay. And the neighborhood speed limit reductions, Edward or David, are those the speed monitor panels that many of us through our neighborhood associations have advocated for, those slow down panels, or you're going at 40, 50, 60 kilometers, Mr. Chairman, through you? Is that what the speed limit reduction line item of 400,000 is for, please?
Edward?
Thank you through the chair to the councillor. This is actually related to Bill 65 and the potential to be reducing speed limits with on local roads in neighborhoods. But there will be a follow-up report later this year related to that enactment of that bill. What we're looking at that time would be to come forward to council with a proposed plan on how we're actually going to be implementing that. So that money is set aside for implementation of that initiative.
Okay, thank you, Edward. And lastly, to you or the superintendent, pedestrian crossovers. We've had them now for about, I'll say about 2 or 3 years. If I recall, Mr. Chairman, the very first one was up on Lime Ridge Road East, right near the rail trail before Mountain Brow Boulevard. And we've got them on concession, many different places in the city. Now those, Mr. Chairman, are the ones that have the X, the crossover, and the often the flashing yellows where there's heavy volumes of pedestrians, like on concession in front of the Juravinski Hospital. So, Mr. Chairman, maybe Edward, David, can you maybe quickly describe how have been the effectiveness of pedestrian crossovers in terms of motoring traffic, knowing that they must stop if there's pedestrians crossing there? Through you, Mr. Chairman, maybe just for a comment, please, on how effective they've been, or do we still have some work to do?
David?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Overall, they've been very effective. We have over 70 locations now.
Wow.
And various types. We work with Hamilton Police Services when we do install new locations, and they'll go out and evaluate and ensure that we have compliance. But overall, we've had very limited contact with concerns around these facilities. So they appear to be operating well. I know a number of other municipalities throughout the province have stated the same thing. So no news is good news.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, David. So, Mr. Chairman, just come back to me for a formal adding the Seniors Advisory Committee after all the speakers are exhausted on page 5 to be consulted with. Unless the clerk can, unless the legislative assistant could add it.
Let me a note on this. Can you respond to Councillor Jackson's inquiry, please?
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair. Councillor Jackson, you can't amend the body of a staff report, only the recommendations.
Oh, nuts. So thanks, Alicia, for your honesty. Okay, so staff, would you please take that as direction that Seniors Advisory would be included moving forward? I'm getting affirmative nods. That's fine. Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Thanks, Alicia.
Thank you. Councillor Vanderbeek.
I think it's Maria.
You're right.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and appreciate the opportunity to speak on this. Certainly very supportive. It's just a shame that, and I agree with Councillor Jackson, former speaker, that, you know, it's wonderful we have the revenue from the red light camera program, but it's a shame that we have to spend $1.7 million for this initiative. I'm certainly supportive of staff going forward. I am going to ask you, Mr. Chairman, just a question, and then whoever wishes to answer. So I'm thrilled with the ladder markings. I think they are actually very prominent throughout the community and in my ward especially. The ongoing issue that I have, and I'm sure other councillors, is the regular line markings, the lane markings. And I think I've complained about this before, and will continue to complain about it, maybe through you to staff. Are we trying to see if there's any other type of material that would be available that they're visible? Because that's a huge issue out there, especially if it's a rainy, gray day or into the night. You can barely see those lane markings. Through you, Mr. Chairman.
Good. Edward.
Thank you through the chair to the councillor. Staff are reviewing the different types of paint that are currently being utilized. And we are also assessing the long-term benefits of going to thermoplast type of markings themselves. They are a higher cost, but at specific locations, they do provide a better value for over the long term. So we are constantly reviewing this area to ensure that we have the best type of markings that we can.
Thank you. So through you, just to clarify, Edward, the thermal that you're speaking of is what we use for the ladder markings now, correct?
That's correct.
Wonderful. I appreciate that because there's many areas, especially the marking material that's used now doesn't even last a year. It pretty well fades away. So I appreciate it. And I appreciate the education program initiations with regards to pedestrian cycling. I think it's most important. You know, we all have to work together. And I think the biggest shock I've had in the last few months is complaints, believe it or not, and it's just unfortunate that it's, you know, it's just out of sight, out of mind as far as drivers and ignorance to the law, or everybody seems to be in a rush. But I've actually had cars driving through where crossing guards are actually blocking the roadway for children to cross, and cars are actually going through it. And that's absolutely shocking that this is happening, and it's just, you know, indicative of where drivers are going. So I can't wait to see more information come forward and support this wholeheartedly.
Thank you. Councillor Vanderbeek.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So thank you to staff for this report. I am wholeheartedly behind it. I have a question, but I want to mention that I think that the most predominant complaint that comes into my office is about speeding and traffic and dangerous driving, you know, on residential streets. And the things that staff have done to help me deal with some of those things in my neighborhoods in Dundas have been very successful and appreciated by my residents who live in that neighborhood. Not necessarily by the residents who drive through it, but by the residents who live in it. On page 3, the engineering priorities, 650,000. Part of that is consulting. Can you just tell me roughly what that consulting is for and how big a part of that $650,000 might be spent on consulting?
David?
Through you, Mr. Chair. So we will retain consultants as needed to undertake if we decide we're going to install traffic calming within an area and we have to do some design work, maybe prepare tenders. So that's what those funds would be used for.
So the consultants are doing the design work?
Through the chair, that would be correct.
Thank you for that. I really think that the 1.7 million coming out of the red light camera money is a bonus for this city. And I'm really happy to see that it's being spent in this way. I would like to see, and I'm happy to see that most of this is true action and real improvements and things that you can put your finger on and point at and see visually so that the community knows that we are actively working toward Vision Zero. And so I just want to say that I'm also interested to see on page 4 that there's no additional staff required to do any of this. It's money that will be spent on action. And so the action for the community is important to me, and I definitely will be supporting this. Thank you.
Mr. Wade?
Yeah, thank you, and I certainly support the principle, but it always boils down to cause and effect and whether, in fact, we're getting results. And one thing I don't see here in the funding, maybe context is important. So we put all those lights up, those the dynamic traffic lights, they record speeds. We've gone into neighborhoods where there's complaints and found that in many cases 80 percentile or higher are actually within the speed limit. And so it really boils down to a very small percentage of people and the perception that it's the broader traffic, but yet it's a small group of people. So that's the context. And we found that in a number of areas. So help me understand when you have 80% of the people doing the speed limit in an area and 15%, are we looking at wholesale type changes? I don't see anything in education here, for example, or I don't see anything addressing aggressive driving issues. Help me understand that.
Through you, Mr. Chair. So we have identified education as a component, and we will be focusing on aggressive driving, speeding. We'll target areas that, as a road safety committee that we establish, that we will discuss and identify what those priorities are. So that information will come through Hamilton Police Services, through their enforcement, as well as through our collision analysis and identifying the key areas that are causing or partially responsible for collisions.
So can you identify in this budget what part of it is going to be allocated to education? Branding? Advertising?
Through you, Mr. Chair. So in the financial section, there's education priorities, and it identifies $400,000.
Is that adequate based on your past experience?
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes.
Okay. And sorry, I shouldn't be characterizing your findings. I should ask you what your findings are when you go into many neighborhoods in respect to the percentage of people that are violating the speed limits.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I mean, every neighborhood is different. Overall, the data would suggest that the majority of motorists in those areas are abiding the law. When it comes to neighborhood areas, it's more about neighborhood livability, neighborhood safety. It's about promoting healthy living and encouraging people to walk and cycle within their neighborhoods. And so as part of this report, that's why we're suggesting more of a holistic approach of looking at neighborhoods rather than individual streets.
Now, pedestrian fall into this only on the roadway, because if I was going to put a squeeze, it'd be nice if there's money available to offset costs to remove snow on sidewalks to keep them on the sidewalks.
Through the chair, that this does not contemplate spending any of this funding on sidewalk clearing. There's a further report that will be coming back to council on that.
It was worth a try. I didn't expect that to be the case. Thank you. Okay, speed humps. So I've been working with my community and put them in some places it works, and usually it's before stop signs, because people are running those stop signs. They literally slow down and stop at the stop sign and go through. But when we, and I had a number of people in Gilkson neighborhood on Cranbrook, where they were really appreciative of us putting the speed bumps down, but they asked me to sit there and observe, so I did with them. And what happens is they go over that speed hump and they make up for lost time after hitting that speed hump. So the question really is, other than strategic located speed humps close to stop signs, are they really working outside of that?
David? Through you, Mr. Chair. There are reports industry-wide that do suggest that speed humps are an efficient form of traffic calming. The difference in speeds can vary from community to community. The points that you have brought up are areas of concern that we do discuss with the residents prior to putting them in. Usually what you find is that those people that accelerate in between the traffic calming devices are more than likely those that would have been speeding through that area to begin with. So that's more of a behavior type issue.
And I just had an email. We replaced snowplows, peel these rubber ones up, and we're constantly repairing them. So again, we're using taxpayers' money trying to resolve an issue. Have we done the assessment on how many we put down, how many we had to replace, and how many actually were petitioned to be removed by the community? Do we have any data on that?
Thank you, through the chair, to council. I believe you had asked for this information at a previous meeting last week. We're just compiling that information. We'll be coming back to council with it.
Appreciate it. So I remember a number of years ago, I started the whole mid-block crossway walks. And I want to thank staff for Mohawk, Upper Paradise by St. Thomas More School. Stone Church I'm pushing for right now to serve a whole community so they can access the school across the street without going all the way up to the roundabout or all the way down to Upper Paradise, which would be counterproductive and it's not, obviously wouldn't be efficient for young children. What is the standard for those requests?
Through you, Mr. Chair. So each location will be evaluated. We'll take into consideration traffic volumes, pedestrians in the area, and we will utilize the provincial warrant system to identify what type of crossing is suitable. There's various types of pedestrian crossovers, and then the highest ranking, of course, is IPS, or it's referred to as an intersection pedestrian signal, but that can also be mid-block. So staff will review it, determine which type of device is suitable for that location. We will then prioritize. Obviously, we have a large number of locations throughout the city requesting the installation of devices. So we will prioritize those locations and identify the highest ranking locations to go forward through the capital budget process. Again, as we have in the past, working with councillors, if there's locations that they would like to see installed sooner through their assistance and funding, those locations can be added as needed.
Appreciate it. The last two questions is roundabouts. It's pretty clear from a traffic perspective, the more research you do, it's probably the least violent or least, or probably the safest in the context of violent accidents, head-ons and T-boning and so forth. Is that built in here too, where you've identified intersections that probably better, because of the problems, be better capitalized in regards to implementing roundabouts?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the Vision Zero program has identified roundabouts as a safety feature. We haven't identified specific locations, but we do work with the planning department through new developments. We've installed a number of new roundabouts where we can. So that is something that we will be evaluating.
Okay, I said I had two questions, but I'll take the other one offline. Thank you.
Mr. Danko.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'm just going to start with a kind of an observation here, and then I'll get into my questions. So I appreciate staff coming back with this report, and I really appreciate the previous council's commitment to the ideals of Vision Zero. I'd suggest respectfully that the plan that we have here, this is, in my opinion, a Vision Zero plan for a council in a city that really hasn't embraced the fundamentals of Vision Zero. So I can appreciate that within the budget and the political constraints that staff is faced with, that plan fits that goal. But in my opinion, it doesn't go nearly as far as what the ideals of Vision Zero really meant to achieve. So I'm going to move on to my questions here. The $1.7 million from the for the red light cameras, is that intended to be an annual contribution, or is that a one-time?
The chair to the councillor, at this point, this is a one-time for this year. We'll be looking to incorporate potentially that funding into future capital budgets instead of having it come out of the red light reserve.
So the recommendation that's before us is for a 2019 to 2025 plan, but we're only looking at the funding for the 2019 portion, right?
That's correct. It's for this year's budget.
So is there an intention then for, in the future, to come back with an assessment of how this plan is performing and further recommendations? Or is this basically, we're checking off Vision Zero as done?
Through the 2020 capital budget deliberations, we'll be coming forward with a capital sheet for council's consideration.
Yeah, I'll come back to that at the end. Let me find my spot here. The engineering priorities that are identified, can you explain what the variable message boards and QN warning system for the Red Hill Valley Link, and sort of how much of that $650,000 that portion is?
Through you, Mr. Chair. So as part of previous safety studies that were completed, that was identified for variable message boards on the Red Hill and the Link. We did have these installed about a year ago. That contract had expired, and so we are in the process of completing a tender and purchase of new signs that will be installed. These signs are used to communicate safety messages, whether through traffic operations and maintenance or through issues identified by Hamilton Police Services. The cost around that is approximately $100,000 per year. The QN warning system, this is being installed. We have put a tender out. It is completed. We have identified a system. And so these are signs and flashing devices that will be installed primarily on the link at locations where we've identified rear-end collisions occurring. They're a higher number. And so these advanced signs will provide motorists with awareness that traffic ahead is slowing down, and so that they can adjust their speed appropriately. And the cost for that is around $70,000 per year.
So out of the, I guess I'm kind of confused of if that was previously identified, why that's being included with the Vision Zero plan of an annual cost of $170,000 when I'm not sure that if that was previously identified, you know, why it's part of this funding, but I'll leave that for now. So in the Vision Zero plan that's presented, we're talking about the 5 E's. And part of that is education and engagement. And the capital there is the funding, $400,000 for engagement, $400,000 for education. I'm a little bit confused about the education component of that. I'm not sure that it's the city's job to teach people how to drive or how to walk. In my opinion, the city's job is to provide a built environment that is safe for all road users. So maybe you can elaborate on the education and engagement a little bit and what the intended outcomes are?
Through you, Mr. Chair. So education and engagement is part of, excuse me, any traffic safety program. I've been in this industry for 20 odd years, and it's always been part of that. The education programs that we run vary. It's also through public health. It's also through Hamilton Police Services. We're looking at expanding our committee to further engage the public, and we want to go out into the community. We want to attend the various fairs or public events so that we're helping to educate throughout the year rather than just on certain time periods. The education component is very costly. We do run some major education programs. Last year we operated the Drive Safe program, the Speed Kills campaign, and that was about $100,000.
So, from my perspective, as a technical person, I would suggest that instead of educating, I'm not sure of the effectiveness of education programs versus the effectiveness of changing the actual geometry of the roads, which has been proven technically to change driver behavior. So when I look at the capital costs, there's $1 million that is just over $1 million that's part of the 2019 capital budget process. So the bike lanes are not included with that capital, is that correct? Because we had a separate report on bike lane component come forward. I can't remember what that total amount was, but.
Through the chair, the implementation of bike lanes is not part of this. That's through separate capital. I do just want to circle back to your comment about education for a second. Education is a requirement underneath the legislation as it relates to red light cameras. So you must have an education campaign associated with it.
I appreciate that clarification. Makes a lot more sense now. So back to the geometry of our built environment, of our roads there. We've made quite a bit of progress actually recently installing knocked down sticks, separated cycling lanes, trying to separate pedestrians from traffic, making sure that traffic is clear and they understand the rules of the road, additional signage at stop signs. So, you know, I recognize the progress that we've made, but I'm surprised that there's not a more of a focus in this plan on that built environment. And when I look at what we've forwarded to the public, or what we've published as the ideals of Vision Zero, there's a couple things in there that I think are important that I don't necessarily see addressed here. So maybe you can comment on that. So the first one is under the engagement in our Vision Zero plan, we talk about neighborhood-wide evaluation of traffic patterns and traffic calming, where getting away from trying to address individual streets where people have to petition for speed bumps and stop signs and that kind of thing. Is the intention for that neighborhood assessment of traffic safety intended to be part of this plan?
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes, it's an opportunity for the residents of that neighborhood to essentially take action within their own neighborhood, identify what their concerns are, what the issues are, and come forward and working in consultation with staff to create an overall plan.
Would that involve the expense of hiring, I assume it would be going outside to hire a consultant to actually do the design work for that?
Through you, Mr. Chair, potentially, yes.
So just from a ward councillor perspective, it would be very helpful to have neighborhood-specific designs done, ready to go, that could be funded either through the capital budget or would be an option for the ward councillor to possibly fund through our area rating money, so that we're not just trying to hit these, you know, one-off speed hump here, stop sign there. So I think that's a really positive direction, and something that I think we could maybe concentrate on a bit more. One of the other parts that I saw in the Vision Zero report was a recommendation to develop standardized cross-sections with a design standard review, so that every time we have a road design coming up, we're not starting from first principles trying to figure out what the cross-section is. Have we made any progress towards that standardization of cross-sections, and is that something that we need to go outside and hire a consultant for that would be part of this funding?
Through the chair to Councillor, there is an initiative underway right now between my division as well as transportation planning, looking at coming up with a Vision Zero complete streets sort of guideline of what these streets should look like moving forward. There is a separate funding, I believe, available for that. This will be initiated this year. It's really about taking all the concepts we have here before us today and incorporating it into the geometric design as we move forward for any new rehabilitations or new roadways in the city.
Thank you for that. So I guess my challenge here is I think this is a great first step. And like I said in my preamble, I really appreciate the previous council's commitment to Vision Zero and staff's furthering that commitment through actual investment of $1.7 million plus the capital costs, the $1 million capital cost plus whatever the capital cost was that we're investing in cycling infrastructure. So it is, I don't want to minimize that this is a significant investment for the city of Hamilton and that we are committed to Vision Zero. I'll leave my comments there, let the other speakers go, but I would like to check on the possibility of getting a report back in 6 months so that this isn't part of the budget process, that we can review the progress that we've made and any capital costs that need to be added, that it doesn't end up getting lumped in with the overall budget deliberations. So I'll leave that for now, and then I'll come back to that after final speakers.
Councillor Wilson.
Thank you for the opportunity to ask questions again. I'm not a member of the committee. I just have a few questions, trying to seek some clarification on the budgetary stuff. We have $6.3 million in the red light camera reserve. Is that correct? Through you, Mr. Chairman?
Ed?
Through the chair to council, that is correct.
So maybe I was misunderstanding this. Prior to 2015, I thought the report said we were spending on annually $2 million on road safety measures. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Is this report saying that we're going to be spending $1.7 million on those same efforts?
This report is outlining what is coming from the red light camera reserve, which is about 1.7. In addition to that, there was over $1 million that was put into the capital budget this year, and it was approved.
So, thank you, Edward. So 1.7 plus $1 million we're spending on safe street work?
Correct.
Okay. May I ask a question? What do we do with the $6.3 million in reserve in the red light camera at present? What is how big does it grow, or what portion of it are we hoping to use, and what is it doing other than sitting there?
Edward?
The red light camera reserve was, I believe, larger at one point. What we're looking at is the sustainability of that red light camera reserve over the long term. Looking at 3-4 years down the line, number of infractions that we get, the amount of funding that is put into the red light camera reserve. So before you this year, we've identified utilizing 1.7 million from the red light camera reserve. What we'd like to do is come back through the capital budget process and identify alternative means of funding a number of these initiatives to ensure that the reserve is actually sustainable over the long term. This money is not the only money that comes out of red light camera reserve. It is also utilized to fund staffing and some other initiatives as well. So we want to ensure that long-term the reserve is sustainable.
That's very interesting. I didn't realize that. What are the principles that guide how red light cameras are expended? I didn't realize it was beyond safe street measures.
Can you just lift the microphone up a little closer?
What are the principles that guide the expenditure of the red light camera reserve?
The funding that is utilized out of the red light camera reserve is related to road safety initiatives in different means.
Just in terms of your comments about the sustainability of the fund, has the fund, I think you said it has diminished over time, but the number of tickets the city receives from red light cameras has been increasing? Is that?
There's clarity on that. Are we seeing drivers getting less infractions because, as Councillor Jackson says, the safety initiative worked?
The red light cameras are at one point was about $9 million. So we are seeing a reduction in terms of the number of red light cameras infractions. We are implementing new locations throughout the city. So there is a fine balance between, I guess, the number of infractions and this overall sustainability of the reserve.
Okay. We are seeing, I'm sorry, Edward, you said we are seeing a decrease in the number of infractions, but the report says we are seeing a continuous rise in the number of collisions. Is that true?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, so when we initially install a red light camera location, violations will be higher, and then through time, those locations have a tendency to decrease. And so it essentially flatlines. And so those locations have less collisions. They also have less violations.
So is it fair to ask then the collisions, if the report is stating that the number of collisions in Hamilton continues to rise, those collisions are moving elsewhere? Or
through the chair, I think we need to frame this discussion in maybe a different manner. Okay. The number of collisions are increasing in the city, but the red light cameras are working because it's, and the overall road safety program is working, because when you look at the number of collisions that result in injuries, they have actually been declining since the initiation of the safety program. As traffic grows, as the population grows, it's expected that the number of overall collisions will increase, but what we're trying to do is focus on those that are the more severe and fatal types of injuries that are caused by the collisions themselves.
Okay, thank you. Speaking of fatal collisions, I want to make sure I understand this before I give some remarks. The fatality or injury that occurs with vehicular cars is 20% of the time. Is that correct? So 95% of our collisions are vehicle only, and of those 95%, 20% are an injury or a fatality occurs.
Through you, Mr. Chair, that's correct.
5% of those collisions involve vulnerable users, but 87% of the time there's a fatality or an injury that occurs as a consequence of that collision. Is that correct?
Through you, Mr. Chair, yeah, there's an injury or fatality related to the vulnerable road user, yes.
Thank you, David. I guess that's, before I continue on with further questions, I guess that's my fundamental and philosophical challenge with this report. My understanding of an approach to city building is that we, and in concurrence with our vision to be the best city to raise a child and to age successfully, those are most vulnerable at both ends of the spectrum. And the data in one of the appendices tells us that it is our youngest who are subject to those injuries and those fatalities. Does it not? Through you, Mr. Chair, to staff.
Through you, Mr. Chair, that's correct.
A city, the best city to raise a child and to age successfully would start with its premise of looking at 80%, 87% of those injuries and work from there. And the report does talk about the need for a balanced approach. That is not a balanced state of affairs. 87% of the people are most vulnerable road users. When there is a collision, they either die or they are injured. That should be the starting point for our Vision Zero. Our most vulnerable citizens who have a life ahead of them or who have lived a good life and have contributed very much to this community and want to continue to age in place, to move, to continue to contribute. And that's a fundamental challenge I have with the Vision Zero report. If we do not acknowledge as a city that our most fundamental guiding principle is to support every effort to ensure the safety and security of our most vulnerable, then we will never realize our vision. I just would like a few more questions if I could in understanding the collision data. I think the report is asking for technology to enable us to collect and count and assess more data. Is that, am I understanding that right, David or Edward? Through you, Mr. Chair.
Through you, Mr. Chair. So one of the things that we are recommending or suggesting in this report, we have recently upgraded our collision database system to a new program which is more advanced than our previous one. As part of this new program, they have brought a new module online that will allow staff to evaluate collisions citywide based on industry performance standard safety performance functions. So bringing in this module will allow us to be able to evaluate our system throughout the entire city.
we presently can't do that now. Is that, just so I'm clear?
Through you, Mr. Chair, we presently can. It's very onerous on staff time to put that information together. This new program will essentially be a click button process. So the system will evaluate all the information for us and then spit that information out into a report much quicker than what it takes right now.
With what we have right now, have we been able to identify collision incidents by ward and by roadway, through you, Mr. Chairman?
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes, that is something we can do. It does take some time to pull out the information, but we are able to do that.
So with this module or whatever, you'll be able to enable citizens to have more immediate and accurate data on where those collisions are occurring and the nature of those collisions, just so I understand the purpose. And this data will guide us in our assessment of our streets for their safety.
Through you, Mr. Chair, that's correct.
Okay. An unfair question, but I just need to know whether we have the answer or not. Do we know presently what guides our police services when they set up any particular enforcement trap, for lack of a better word, trap area? Mr. Chairman, could you?
The Chair, to the Councillor, the priorities for enforcement are really determined by the Police Services Board. We do provide them with input, and we can provide them with requests related to different traffic violations, but it's at the determination of the police force on where they're going to be doing enforcement.
Okay. And I think this report is requesting a partnership with the Hamilton Police Service so that they will have a unit to work with this program. Is that correct?
Currently, through the Chair, we currently work with the London Police Service through the Road Safety Committee, and we'll continue to engage them through that manner.
I just have a question on understanding how the neighborhood assessments are done. If you could provide me with a little bit more latitude. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Okay. I will leave my question there. I have a concern. I like the approach. I just have a concern. We have a built-in inequity in our community and how it's been designed, and some people in our community are more capable than others due to language, shift time, resources to engage in the assessment of their spaces. So I'd just like to flag that there. Thank you. No, I don't want to lose quorum. I don't want to.
Okay, so can you just disengage then, that I can put the next one on? Thank you. Councillor Nan.
Thank you. Through the chair, again, thank you to the staff who've been preparing the report. I think it's very clear, many of us have been mentioning, those of us who are new to this term of council, that over the course of the summer and in our ongoing engagement with residents, that safe streets was the #1 issue that was raised, especially for residents in Ward 3. So from that perspective, the fact that one of the priority actions here is to engage on a neighborhood-specific action plan that allows residents to actually participate in some of the assessment and planning and identification of the types of interventions that are required on a design road perspective is a critical component, I think, for the entire success of the program. That said, I have a couple questions around that neighborhood planning process and the resident engagement process, if staff can respond to that through the chair. So the question that Councillor Wilson just raised around the data being available for assessment by neighborhood, I would argue is critical information that our residents need in order to participate in that planning process. So I would recommend that that just gets integrated into our ward profiles moving forward on an annual basis, that data integrates into what's available online for our neighborhood groups to participate in this process. So to staff, is that, you mentioned earlier that could be done, so do you need further direction to make that happen?
Edward?
Thank you, through the chair. Collision data, and in particular some of this traffic safety data, is one of the key sort of focus areas that we're looking forward to implementing through our open data portal. So we're working with the digital officer of the city. We're looking at incorporating a portal there for traffic safety data as we move forward this year.
So effective this year?
I don't have, through the chair, I don't have exact data when it's being rolled out, but that is one of the initiatives we're looking at.
Through the chair, I appreciate that. And the second question, and again, this is raised primarily from all of the conversations over the course of the last couple of seasons with residents. An area that I know is really important for residents who live near our parks across the entire city is to ensure a target that says this city is working towards zero impact or zero injury, zero fatality in and around our parks. I know that in Ward 3, the young people who have been impacted by vehicle hits, it's occurring in and around our parks or neighborhood streets where children are trying to make their way towards a park. And I feel like the component of this report that's missing is those bold visionary statements and targets that say we are, in this report and through the strategic plan, aiming to be a city that has zero impact to children in and around our parks. To me, putting a target like that on our books then says that helps shape and direct where we are investing in our safety interventions and design around our parks. So I don't know how to form this in a question, but I guess what I'm saying echoes some of what my other council colleagues have already said, which is our city needs to go further in terms of zero impact, vision zero, and particularly making sure that we are moving towards targets in a bold way. That said, I can appreciate that we got to start somewhere. And I appreciate staff being very clear that this is our starting place and that through the evaluation process, we're hoping to integrate ongoing road design and maintenance ideas that can be implemented citywide. So I just want confirmation from staff through you, the chair, that that is part of what's built into this framework, is that we're saying we're going to use 2019 as an opportunity to implement some much needed change, and that based on those changes, we will be able to, as a city, put forward a citywide strategy that continues to move us towards Vision Zero.
Through you, Mr. Chair, that's correct.
Okay, thank you. That concludes my questions.
It's ironic that a number of some of the speakers that voted against the 0.05% increase for interior roadworks didn't understand that whenever they go into roadworks, they build in some of the traffic solutions at the time of those works. So we lost that opportunity, and I just want to highlight that. The second piece is this is really about hitting targets and how we get there and what we implement. Correct?
Through the chair to the councillor, this plan really is a multifaceted plan on improving road safety throughout the whole city. There is no one magic bullet, and that's why this plan really comes at it from a number of different perspectives, from education perspective, engineering perspective, enforcement perspective. It will take time for us to get there, and it will take time to change the attitudes of the drivers and motorists that are out there. So this program really is very large, wide in scope, and hopefully through this we'll be able to move the yardsticks in terms of improving road safety in the city.
And I appreciate that. And every time I sit down with traffic on that, they will tell us that our roads are designed safe. Can we improve on them is the question, and I think that's where that's the discussion that we're embarking on. And anything can be improved if you got the money to do so. But I think it's also important to understand what is happening in regards to a lot of these collisions. And has the police and do we have access to the causal relationship to these accidents? So were people impaired? Were people texting? Were people distracted? Were people zipping out in the middle of a road? There's just so many arrays of things in regards to charges and findings. Do we have that data and analytics?
Through the chair to the councilor, we do have that data, and that is some of the data we go through in terms of analyzing what is the best approach in certain areas to deal with improving roadway safety. So that is a key statistic. Those are key statistics we utilize in determining appropriate measures.
And is that made available to all the councillors, that data? Was that analytics, the police analytics?
Through the chair, the data is within a database. What we do is we summarize it on an annual basis and provide that to council.
Okay. When's the last time you sent that to council? And if you haven't, can you send that moving forward?
Through the chair, I believe the annual collision report is coming to you this week
okay,
for
perfect.
analysis.
Thank you.
And the final speaker is Councillor Collins.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. And first and foremost, I just wanted to thank at least the recipients that receive all of my requests for traffic-related issues, and that would be Martin White, Dave Ferguson, and Lewis Wickline. They're always tremendous in terms of their response. So I did want to put that on the record because we don't get too many opportunities to thank them for their service. So in this context, with this report here, I know that they've always been very proactive in responding to the concerns I've relayed to them and their department. With that said, there was mention earlier about the police and traffic staff working with the police as it relates to moving these issues forward. And I will be raising this at our Police Services Board, but what is the plan with traffic and police as it relates to the, 40 is going to become the new 50 as it relates to the speed limits? And I'm curious to know how the messaging and the education transitions motorists, not just in Hamilton but elsewhere, to that lower speed limit, how tickets then are, enforcement is then I guess, rolled out on the streets. Are traffic staff working with police as it relates to how we deal with that as a corporate entity?
Is that part of your education plan?
Through the chair to the councillor, this was actually the subject of discussion last week we had with London Police Services, the traffic control section there. We'll be coming back to you later in the year in terms of how we're going to roll out the entire ASE program. That obviously offers a measure of enforcement itself. Changing the speed limits at the various neighborhood level will evolve, obviously changing a lot of attitudes as well in terms of drivers as we move forward. So that is something we're working through, that we are part of a province-wide committee that's looking at implementing this, and we'll be looking to implement those best practices here in the city of Hamilton.
Okay, I look forward to that because I think that's going to be a big discussion in terms of, is there a transition period? How do we transition people to, who've been driving maybe for 60 or 70 years and 50 is the norm, and now it's something different. So I can certainly hold off on my questions until that report comes back. What struck me over the years, Mr. Chairman, through you, is that the vast majority of requests that we put in, whether it's for lowering a speed, installing a speed bump, installing a new stop sign, those traffic calming measures that are so often come to our office, the vast majority of the investigations yield that no action is required. And I would say that in maybe 1 in 10, and I'm just guessing right now, but I'd say 1 in 10, there is a positive positive response from traffic as it relates to what the resident has requested is recommended for approval. And the other 9, again, anecdotal, are left to us certainly then to deal with the street or the neighborhood to determine whether or not we will initiate change politically. So as we see these reports come forward in terms of trying to make the city safer, it's been my observation that when investigations have taken place, especially in established neighborhoods, where we have long-standing data that would illustrate that, where we look at collisions or we look at other data in terms of radar or speed studies that we undertake, oftentimes traffic staff doesn't find a problem, and that problem then I think could, in many cases, is put into there's a perceived problem, and we are then forced to take action. What do we keep stats in terms of those requests that come in? How many actually make it through that engineering test where it's deemed that
meeting the warrants then?
Meets the warrants for whatever, and I just raised 3 of them. I'm sure there are others, whether it's speed, stop signs, speed bumps. Have we studied that to determine?
David, you done analysis on that?
Through you, Mr. Chair, no, we haven't done a specific analysis. I mean, staff themselves review locations. We know primarily when we do these investigations that there aren't identified issues as per the standards that are identified through the Ontario traffic manuals, or identified issues related to speeding. The majority of people, motorists, are traveling at the speed limit. Again, I mean, things have changed over the last 10 years where, as I said earlier, it has become more about neighborhood livability and encouraging healthy living in neighborhoods and how residents feel within their own neighborhoods. So that's more what's being dealt with these days than true issues within neighborhoods.
Thanks for that, Dave. And I find that as those neighborhoods change too, in terms of who's living there, older people move out, maybe the original owner who purchased the house in the 70s has now moved on, and a new family moves in. There's certainly maybe a fresh perspective in terms of how the neighborhood or street is functioning, and so those new neighbors and new residents certainly generate calls. But back to the political nature of it, oftentimes then when there's a negative response, falls on the individual councillor then to find the resources to accommodate the requests. And my first reaction when there is a negative response is that if there's a desire on the street or broader neighborhood to implement change where traffic doesn't support it, I certainly need to know that there's majority support in the neighborhood. And so then those costs, whether it's for the speed bump, and those are, I can't recall the costs now. I think all streets are different in terms of how many you put on there, but I don't know if it's in the $20,000 range. The pedestrian signals that were referenced earlier, they're a higher cost. Stop signs, obviously, there's nominal cost there for installation. So to the reserve, my question would be then, is there an opportunity for us to understand, and I don't know if it's by ward or, because I've used my area rating and I've probably spent now tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, on some of those initiatives. Speed boards, I think, are a very popular request. I just don't know what the policy is right now in terms of drawing on the red light camera reserve, which these items are funded from, versus, sorry, councillor, doesn't meet the warrants, you're left to your own devices. And thankfully, I've had access to area rating to fund some of those initiatives. But I've seen others come with individual motions that draw on the reserve. So is there a policy we can create in terms of understanding how we, in responding to those requests from the neighbors, can draw on the red light camera reserve for pedestrian/traffic related improvements and upgrades?
Thank you, through the chair to the councillor. First, I'm going to start off my response with apologizing to my friends at the Hamilton Police Service. That slip of a tongue previously. In terms of these individual requests, and we're seeing a lot of these requests come in, and they're looked at very much in isolation. And this is where we're going to go back to where we talk about in this report about looking at it from a neighborhood perspective. Putting in potentially some measure along one street, or say traffic calming or always stop, usually means that we're transferring potentially that problem to another parallel street. To ensure neighborhood, community safety, really need to look at them at the neighborhood level. Look at where the walkability paths are. Look at it from a school zone safety perspective. Look at it from an overall pedestrian perspective. Where do people want to come and go from? So that is really what we're preaching in this report here. So start looking at things at a higher level from a neighborhood perspective. That way we can also develop through that process, not only getting that feedback from the residents, we can develop potential capital programs to implement those, and then we can put those forward to council instead of going back to the individual funding programs that we have.
Okay. Yeah, I just find it an odd situation, and I'm not certain whether we need to use other metrics. So the obvious ones are collision stats as it relates to either vehicles and/or pedestrians. We do our speed monitoring, and oftentimes they're not capturing at least the issues that have been raised and brought to our attention by our residents. So, 50, 60-year-old survey, no collision history there, and then all of a sudden there's 2 or 3 people on the street who are just anxious to have 2 or 3 speed bumps put in, and those are the issues then we're forced to grapple with between staff and our colleagues here, whether it's at Public Works or elsewhere. So I would like to understand at some point through them if there is a way to find out how many requests are actually warranted from an engineering perspective and how many fall to that political side of the equation where we're then forced to deal with what may be perceived from an engineering perspective as a perceived issue rather.
You want 3 different answers in, how many met the warrants, how many the councillor put it in, and how many we do nothing on?
Well, and I'm not interested, and I'm not interested in going back into the archives, but even if they have something for 2016 or 2017.
For the last 2 years in.
Yeah, if there's some review that can be undertaken, I think that's important because, I'm almost positive 80 to 90% of the initiatives that come to this table here, and that's where they usually come through a notice of motion and then a motion, are politically motivated because they haven't met the warrants. But obviously something's up because we wouldn't be getting petitions and individual requests for no reason. So I'm interested in receiving what that information looks like and where we go from there, knowing that this is going to be an annual discussion and has been for a number of years now.
So Edward, I see Hamilton Police Services are here. I don't know whether you texted them, asked them to come, but welcome. And I don't know whether you can answer this on the spot, but a member of the committee asked, how do you determine where you do speed enforcement? Can one of you answer that now, or would you rather answer it sometime later? If you come down, if you got the answer, just come down to the empty chair there. And Marty, first introduce who you are so the members of the committee know.
Certainly. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Relative through you, Mr. Chair, relative to the question by the councillor, I'm just not clear on the context regarding the location for those requests.
When you do speed enforcement was a question that come up. How do Hamilton Police Services decide where to do the enforcement? Is it councillor complaints? Is it citizen complaints? Or is it just hotspots that you have statistically available? For example, the link where we had that problem, you did I think it's a POP enforcement out there. How do you determine that?
Certainly. So just by way of introduction, my name is Marty Schulenberg, and I'm the Commander for Support Services Division. So with respect to enforcement and your specific...
So speed enforcement is your area then?
It's one of the areas that we look at. I don't have officers that are specifically assigned to speed enforcement. What I do have is the breathalyzer technician officers, the drug recognition evaluators, the reconstruction officers. But we, from Support Services Division, will track the performance and the number